Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie, I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, and today we are doing another paint and chat video. So I'll talk a little bit about what's coming up, but for now I just want to talk about what I'm going to be using today. So I'm going to be painting two different spreads in today's video. This first one is some peonies with some watercolour using my fountain pen and ink. I'll leave a link to all of the supplies that I'm using down below, but I'm sharing on screen the fountain pen, which is a Fude de Mannen, and also the paintbrush which I'm using, which is the collaboration with Ohn Mar Win with Pro Arte and her quill brushes. This is also with my old watercolour palette, so if you saw my video from a couple of weeks ago, you'll know that it's now been upgraded. But I'm working in my Strathmore Sketchbook, and then later on I'll be working in my Hahnemuehle sketchbook, again with watercolour and ink, but swapping the way around that I do it. So here I'm using line first and watercolour second, and then in that spread you'll see me using watercolour first and line second, because I really love playing around with the order of my art, seeing how that changes things, whether it loosens me up, and just having fun with my supplies. So I hope you enjoy watching this whilst I chat away with you and talk about something that's pretty important. So back in May I shared a very chatty video about making time for art and the things that I have to do to make sure I create, and that seemed to really resonate with a lot of you, and it got me thinking that after that video I thought that this could become a little video series about the things that prevent us from creating, because I know so much of art and creativity isn't just about the time that we have or the skills we have or even the materials that we own to create it. So much about it is the mental aspect of it too. So I thought that this series could be about that. I put an Instagram story out the other day and there were so many responses, and I just asked about what your blockers are when creating. So there's plenty for me to talk about, but today's video is going to be about overwhelm and comparison. The other ones in this series will probably be about guilt and perfectionism, which is definitely a biggie, material storage, and our creative fears. So I hope you'll enjoy this one, and do feel free to share any blockers that you have down below in the comments for future video topics. Okay, so when it came to overwhelm, there were a lot of responses with this, and it ranged from the materials that we own and feeling overwhelmed with what to use, and basically having too much choice and possibilities, versus being overstimulated and feeling overwhelmed with social media, and that also ties in with the comparison and getting distracted. But there's so many different things in here that I want to sort of break it down, because I know that social media can be amazing for inspiration, but it's also easy to get stuck in a loop of just finding inspiration and actually never doing it ourselves. As a mixed media artist, I also totally understand the overwhelm with materials and having too much choice. And I think because we are mixed media artists, we have a lot to choose from, and sometimes it can be very difficult to know where to start. And one of my most common questions is, how do I know what to use? Because obviously with so many different types of paint, with acrylic and watercolour and gouache, how do I know what I want to use for a specific piece? And then how do you know when things are finished, when you stop adding more and more on, because you have so many supplies that you could add on top of it as mixed media? So I think I'll start there actually with how I decide what to use, in case that's helpful for you. Sometimes it depends on the vibe, because for me, if I want to be really, really loose, or I want to be a bit more free with my brushstrokes, I'll be using watercolour. If I want to be a little bit more careful, I will use gouache, and I also find that's better for me when I want something that's a bit more opaque. So sometimes it is about thinking about what I want as the end result, not as a set thing of what I want this piece to be, but in terms of the painting, in terms of whether I want it nice and opaque, or if I want it super loose or maybe a bit more detailed. So that definitely ties in with that. And there are obviously levels of looseness and detail that you can get with all different types of mediums, but I tend to choose my materials based on what I'm feeling. A lot of it is just vibes and what I fancy that day. When I want to be really, really vibrant and have something super opaque, then I might use acrylic ink, because I also really love mixing those up. And again, I've done a video about acrylic ink on my channel. But if I'm painting something that maybe works well with that, like fruit or perhaps some really colourful landscapes, I'll reach for that over some of my other things like gouache, which tends to be a little bit more muted. And then with watercolour, obviously that's a new medium for me, but I will reach for that if I want to play around with blending and water and just experiment with that. So it does really depend on my mood. And then with things on top, generally I'll always use coloured pencils and Neocolors. I can't seem to finish a painting without that. But it can also be affected by time. So if I want something really, really quick, not having to wait for things to dry, that's when I'll go for my brush pens. So time is definitely a factor that makes me really, really quick when I've got my brush pens, so my Tombos, my Echolina and my Stettler. I'll reach for those maybe when I want to do some fast thumbnails. And again, I'll put some coloured pencils on top of that usually. So I always find that it's my base layer that tends to change. And then I've got my formula for things to go on top. I do have a video on my channel for my mixed media and like how to approach it, so I'll leave a link to that video as well in case that's helpful. But I totally understand that it can be overwhelming and it's not always very helpful for me to just say it depends on your mood, but it can depend on your inspiration. Perhaps you've seen someone who has used acrylic ink and you're really interested in the techniques that they've used. Or maybe you've seen a really lovely piece that they've created and it's inspired you to get your watercolour out. So it can also be linked to your inspirations, and obviously I know there's a whole issue with overwhelm there, which we will get on to. But I think it's really important for us to focus on what we want, and I know that's really, really hard when there's so much social media, but you can absolutely use other people's work to feel inspired for your own and follow that focus. We're not wanting to replicate art, but we are wanting to follow that sort of creative spark. As I mentioned in that video about finding time, it's important to follow those creative sparks because you can't tend to ignite it again later on. You kind of have to do it when you feel it, because I find those are really, really hard to tap into when perhaps you actually do have more time to do it, but your brain's just like, no, not today. So I find that making time for it is important, and that's why I love timers, because I don't have time to think. And so that's why that really helps me unlock things with overwhelm as well, because if I've got a certain amount of time, I kind of just, right, I'll grab something and go for it, rather than worrying so much about the end result. But let's talk about social media and overstimulation. Now, I love social media and I do find a lot of inspiration from it, but I also know that it's a comparison trap, and it's really tricky to not compare yourself to others if you're coming to it from a lower place, and also that you can just be stuck in a scrolling loop of just scrolling and scrolling, trying to find inspiration, and then never actually creating for yourself. Now, I feel like this is tricky because the algorithm wants you to stay on their apps, whichever social media apps you're on. It's designed to keep you there, so it doesn't want you to go off and create for yourself. It wants you to just get that hit of dopamine as you're scrolling, and to be honest, it's not a good feeling to just be doom scrolling all the time. We always feel overstimulated when we're done, and it's not necessarily a good place to then start your art. What I do is I will always save something that really speaks to me. I love using the save feature on Instagram and on TikTok. So if you see something that kind of ignites that little spark, I would save it, because then it's a bit more curated. When you feel like you've got time for art, then you can go to your saved collections and look through what inspired you, rather than getting distracted by a million things in your feed and feeling overwhelmed. So I'm a big, big fan of collections, but also if you want to be away from the apps, then good old-fashioned pin boards and mood boards is a lovely thing to do. You can save things to your desktop, maybe you can screenshot something and then just keep it on a folder on your phone or on your computer, so you're, again, not distracted by other stuff on social media and can focus on those. It's very, very easy to get distracted by other people's art, and there is definitely a difference between feeling inspired and feeling like dejected or like your work isn't good enough, and unfortunately that is a very tricky thing to fix, and I'm certainly not a therapist, but it is very much about the way that we come to art and how we're feeling about ourselves. For me, the only way to get past this feeling is to actually create, and it's constantly pushing through, and we'll create work that we don't love and that we aren't happy with, and that will instantly make us feel dejected and want to give up. But it's so, so important to just keep going. And that's also the way that we'll find our style. It's how we'll build up our creative confidence and find our voice in art, because the only way you'll get to that point is by creating loads and loads of work and loads of rubbish work. It's always the rubbish work that we create that leads to those breakthroughs. You'll learn something from everything that you create, even if you don't necessarily realise it. It will be in the back of your mind, and then you'll create something amazing and you'll be super proud of it. And it's because of all those lessons that we've learned that it's been able to happen. It is really hard not to compare yourself, but also important to remember we're all at different timelines, all at different stages of our journeys. You're going to have a lot of things that I don't have in terms of pressure and time and things that stop you from creating. So it's important not to compare ourselves. And also that social media is the highlight reel. That's obviously a very well-used cliche now, but it is. So you won't see all the struggles from creators sharing online because they're not sharing them. So even I have creative wobbles and I feel like I'm not good enough, but I don't necessarily talk about it online, so things can look super duper easy. But it is important to remember that we are all unique and we are our own artists, so your art has a place in this world, but we won't know it until you create it. And you absolutely don't have to share it online, though I do find it can be a really good thing to do, because even if you share work you aren't happy with, it's amazing how much support that you get from other people online who will help you see it in a different light. And I'm pretty sure I've talked about that before on my channel, but social media can also be a place of good and not just bad, but as I say, it does depend on our mindset. Having set times for our social media use can also help. I've just done a deprivation week on my Artist Way journey, which will be coming in the next vlog, but that was basically getting off of social media. And for me, I am at a point where I'm pretty confident in my style and my creation. There are obviously still days I feel very low and unconfident about it, but most of the time I am feeling pretty good, which is important as a full-time artist. And I really missed not having that inspiration, but I can also see how it takes away from our own thoughts. So you could try that. You could try having limits on your time scrolling. I've put limits on myself for replying to messages and getting that work-life balance rather than the scrolling aspect. For me, TikTok is the worst because I tend to not use that for art inspiration. I tend to just get stuck in the algorithm there. But for Instagram, I do find it's a really good place for me to find my inspiration. And I am quite curated with my time on there in terms of finding inspiration that way. As I said, I do think collections are a really good place to be, so you're not totally overstimulated. And the algorithm is good in terms of finding art that you like. Sometimes it's nice to push beyond that, but yeah, I think having time limits and just using it, not necessarily copying the work that you see on there, but just really thinking about why you like it. So instead of maybe saving everything that you see, having a little step back and maybe finding 3 things that you like about that work. Maybe it's a colour combination or the use of material, which will inspire you to feel less overwhelmed with all of your materials and focus on just one. Or maybe it's their mark making or energy. There's always something that we'll see we'll like, and it takes a little bit of time to work out why we like it, but I do think that helps and hopefully will help direct your creating as well. Hopefully I haven't word vomited and rambled too much and that's made a bit of sense. I know it is really, really tricky, but it does take a lot of work, and I'm going to be covering like self-doubt and confidence in a future video because I know that's its own issue entirely with the perfectionism and fear of messing up and, just feeling like we're not good enough. But I really hope this has helped. I know it can be really overwhelming with materials and with social media, but hopefully there's a few tips there that will help you with the practical side of things, because the mindset thing is definitely a deep thought, personal journey, and I wish you all the best with it. I really do love talking about this stuff, so feel free to share your thoughts down below in the comments. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. A big thank you to my patrons for allowing me to create these videos here on YouTube, and thank you for being here. I will speak to you all next Sunday in my new YouTube video, but as I said, this will be an ongoing series, so feel free to share down below in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next Sunday in my new video. See you later!